After being down for a while, the Sorcerer is finally seeing a resurgence in Season 5, with not one but two lightning-based builds making it to the top of the endgame tier list. But in today's video, I'm actually going to be showcasing a third type of lightning build, sort of a hybrid between the two if you will, taking some of the best parts of both builds and merging them while not really losing out on too much damage. And while I don't claim to be the level of player that some of these top tier guide writers and content creators on say Maxwell are, and in fact a lot of this is only possible because of the work they've done and them actually paving the way with build guides and whatnot, I also think that while these tier lists do serve as a great baseline and reference point for what builds are actually going to be able to say push to the highest ranks of the pit, if you don't necessarily care about pushing to those absolute highest ranks, but are just looking for a build that is viable in the endgame, say you can still do say tier 7 of the Infernal Hordes quite comfortably, and relatively high ranks, say 120 or 130 ranks of the pit, you don't necessarily need the top S tier build to do so, right? So first up, for a brief overview of this build, this is still primarily based on a chain lightning build, but with one or two pieces swapped out to be able to benefit from lightning spear. Namely, the aspect of splintering energy. As long as you're stacking critical hit damage, you're able to increase the damage of this specific aspect by a lot. So really going from a chain lightning build that doesn't use this aspect to one that does use this aspect, you're just changing out one piece pretty much, and with a few tweaks to your skills and perhaps affixes on your gear, you're gonna be able to actually spawn a lot of lightning spears to sort of supplement your chain lightnings, which in my opinion should make up for that one aspect or couple of pieces of gear that you might be taking out a couple of the multipliers for chain lightning for to use this aspect instead. And having played a chain lightning spec before, all the way back in season 1 with Omni Power, if you're familiar with that, obviously now it's a very different build, but I really appreciated even back then having Lightning Spear for the increased survivability that it provides, because it actually has a very high chance of stunning enemies, and on bosses it'll be staggering enemies as well, right? Especially if you have multiple sort of auto-targeting lightning spears going around. It will actually greatly help your survivability, and I actually prefer it over having Flame Shield. Obviously because of the significant damage that it provides, although people might argue that having Flame Shield gives you a way to proc the Talrash's ring, but if I'm not mistaken, as long as you use the Firebolt enchantment, because the ring does say dealing fire damage, it doesn't say you have to like cast the fire spell. So with the Firebolt enchantment, you will be in fact dealing fire damage, so that should already allow you to proc the Talrasha loop just fine without having to use Flame Shield. And that's not even all, because yet another benefit of using Lightning Spear in this build is the passive Conjuration Mastery, which gives you additional damage, movement speed, and very important mana regeneration, which of course is especially important for if you're using Chain Lightning per conjuration that you have. And lastly, if we actually compare this build to what people are calling the most busted Sorcerer build right now, the pure Lightning Spear build, or technically the Frozen Orb Lightning Spear build, because the idea of that build is to use the Fractured Winterglass Unique to cast Frozen Orbs or spam Frozen Orbs to be able to cast more conjurations and lower the cooldowns on your conjurations. And if you actually find a really well rolled Fractured Winterglass, say with a greater affix Conjuration Mastery, you may well want to go for that build as well. But my build here gives you the flexibility of, if you don't have the Fractured Winterglass, or say don't have some of the mana regeneration methods for that build, you might want to try out this Chain Lightning build, which will still be able to conjure a fair number of lightning spears, of course alongside Chain Lightnings, and even going into the high end with really good gear. The way that you'll be able to generate lots of lightning spears, in theory at least, is with being able to spam Chain Lightnings, and with its high lucky hit chance and crit chance, you'll be able to form crackling energies, and then of course as long as your gear is good enough, you'll take the Lightning Spear enchantment, which says that you'll have a chance to spawn a Lightning Spear whenever you pick up a crackling energy, for you to also be able to have this alternate way compared to the Frozen Orb variant to also spawn lots of lightning spears. And these mechanics actually work especially well in the Infernal Hordes as well, which is pretty much the premier way to farm in the endgame right now. Now this build actually doesn't require that much to get going, and yet can actually scale up quite a bit with the right affixes and rolls and whatnot. So there is a lot of room to grow with it, but also it isn't too hard to get into, especially with the season journey sort of favoring lightning based or chain lightning based and conjuration based gear. So just by doing the season journey, assuming you're playing a seasonal character, you should be able to pick up some of these pieces and aspects that you'll need fairly soon. And as for what to actually target farm, you'll want the Axial Conduit unique pants. These are the new pants that drop from Grigor, which of course requires Living Steel to summon, and Living Steel is primarily farmed through Hell Tides, right? Opening the Hell Tide chests. And besides that, another aspect that I would highly recommend is the recharging aspect. This can be obtained by doing the Zenith dungeon in the Fractured Peaks. So earlier I said something about mana being sort of a higher requirement for the pure Lightning Spear based build, because with Frozen Orb there's no equivalent to the recharging aspect, whereas for Chain Lightning you can actually pick up that aspect guaranteed, although the roll is a bit lower, and you can also gamble rings to get that aspect to give you mana regeneration for Chain Lightning, which is actually the main thing to manage with this build, because with Axial Conduit, it basically says that once you cast too many Chain Lightnings or have too many Chain Lightnings active at once, the more draining on your mana it is. And there's actually a sort of negative effect of this unique, which is that once you reach 0 mana, all of your Chain Lightnings that are active will just get nullified instantly. So with this unique, it's very important to not only have the recharged aspect or the recharging aspect. I highly recommend you get the aspect before using this unique. And the second thing to really be aware of when playing this build is, like I said, to not have actually too many Chain Lightnings out at once. Otherwise, it'll just cancel all your Chain Lightnings, right? But on the flip side, once you are able to get enough, say, mana regeneration on your affixes, on your helm and chest, you'll have a high roll on recharging aspect. You also have maximum mana from your Paragon board and resource generation rolls, or lucky hit chance to restore primary resource on a couple of your pieces, namely your, say, weapon and offhand. You'll actually be able to spam a lot more Chain Lightnings and just have more active at once. But before you actually deck out your character, you want to keep the number of Chain Lightnings to, say, capping out at whatever it is before you consistently go to 0 mana, right? So for me, it's about 5 Chain Lightnings right now, give or take, with my crappy gear. It might be a bit lower than that when you first start out, but sort of the fun thing about this build is figuring out how to manage your mana, getting gear to be able to supplement, casting more Chain Lightnings, and once you have enough of this mana regeneration and capability to have tons of Chain Lightnings out at once, you can then essentially reconfigure your build, whereas originally I would actually recommend using the Ice Blades enchantment to have free Ice Blade spawn, and with the Summoned Ice Blades upgrade, you'll actually be able to lower the cooldown on your other skills, namely, say, your Lightning Spear and your Unstable Currents as well. But once you have good enough gear, you might actually be able to respec from using this Ice Blade enchantment and going into the Lightning Spear enchantment, because with good enough gear, you'll have lots of Chain Lightnings and hence a lot more, theoretically, crackling energies that you'll be picking up, and thus then spawning a lot more Lightning Spears that way. So theoretically, once you get to the zenith, no pun intended, of gear, the number of Lightning Spears you'll be able to conjure might actually be quite a decent amount, on top of a lot of the, of course, cooldown reduction that you have as well. And while the sheer number of Lightning Spears you'll be able to generate with this may not necessarily match the level of the Frozen Orb variant with the Fractured Winterglass, with this one you'll still be able to benefit from Chain Lightning's damage as well, right? And also the AoE explosions that you can get from using Axial Conduit, which for certain types of gameplay like speed farming may actually be stronger, right? May actually be comparable. And on top of that, when you get to the super duper endgame, instead of using the Shaco, which is probably very good in its own right, especially with the cooldown reduction and plus the skill ranks, but Andariel's Visage, theoretically combined with, of course, the sheer number of Chain Lightnings that you have and the super high lucky hit chance that it has, you'll be able to get a huge DPS boost with this unique as well, or Mythic Unique as well. And going into some of the gear and skills really quick, and a full template will be linked in the description box below as well. But first of all, of course, we have the very standard Firebolt to be able to use the enchantment for burning damage. And then here we have max chain lightning with greater chain lightning, elemental dominance. This is not actually points I spec'd into it. This is actually just passive points from the Tarasha loop for opponent warding. And then here I have 1 point to elemental attunement, teleport, shimmering teleport, just 1 point to teleport, very standard. Also 1 point to ice armor. Here enhanced ice armor gives you mana regeneration, which is great. And then shimmering ice armor, maxed out glass cannon, again very standard. These are very standard as well. Max mana shield, max protection, conjuration mastery is great. You want to max this out for sure. And take ice blades and then summon ice blade for better cooldown reduction on your lightning spear and other skills. Here of course lightning spear, you also don't have to put any additional points into this because most of the damage comes from the aspect, which I'll get into. And here I like invoke lightning spear for stunning, which is really useful and great for survivability. Here I just have 1 point here. This is kind of preference, just to increase the lucky hit chance a little bit. But chain lightning itself actually has a decent lucky hit base chance. So you might not actually need this and can put a point back into align the elements. Next, here I just talked about is Devouring Blaze. This combos with the Firebolt enchantment to give you increased critical strike damage. And then here you want max static discharge to form crackling energies, and then invigorating conduit to give you mana back, which you might be able to spec a few points out of once you get enough mana regeneration on your gear. And then here I like to take all the way down to supreme and stable elements. This is kind of a optional point here, but I actually like having it to be able to pulse more crackling energies to just be able to also benefit from the overflowing energy key passive here, which also lowers my cooldowns on shock skills, namely my ultimate as well as my lightning spear further, right? And then here electrocution is nice to max out to give you some survivability. Some people like to take Virus Mastery primarily for chain lightning builds, but because here I'm trying to maximize or lower the cooldowns on my lightning spear as much as I can, I like to take overflowing energy. Moving on to gear really quick. This is pretty crap gear, but I have a lot of the necessary pieces already, or at least some versions of them, but I'll just go through them. So starting with my helm, I'm using the Orange Herald aspect, which helps to reduce the cooldown on unstable currents. You can also go for survivability aspect here, like the unstoppable and damage reduction while using ice armor. I see that is a pretty common choice. If you have a Mythic Unique, I think Andariel's Visage is actually the choice here. If you happen to have a Shade Code, that's obviously really strong as well. For the chest, this is kind of just a legacy item, but you essentially want to run a survivability aspect. Now getting into the main offensive pieces, for gloves, this is also a legacy piece. This is my Eternal Realm character, but you'll just want at least one of your offensive pieces should have Conceited. For my pants, of course, is Actual Conduit, which drops from Grigor, the Galvanic Saint. For boots, it's kind of optional. You can go for Asu's Heirloom for additional crit chance, and also a whopping amount of critical strike damage, which benefits your splintering energy aspect. So I would probably recommend Asu's, but you can also alternatively run something defensive on the helm and then put Orange Herald, the aspect of Orange Herald on your boots as well, for just more cooldown reduction on the ulti. But this seems to work really well for me right now. So of course, for the weapon, it's Splintering Energy. You can also consider using a two-hander with Splintering Energy, but if you have enough mana regen to spam Chain Lightnings with a one-hander, that might actually be better. And by using one-hander, you can use another aspect here. I like to use Lightning Rod, and there is another Chain Lightning related aspect, which I will show you right here, which is the one that increases the number of bounces that you get. But I normally wouldn't recommend that one, and it's here the aspect of Unbroken Tether. I wouldn't really recommend this if you're using Axial Conduit, which you should, because by making Chain Lightning last longer, it really increases the strain of mana with Axial Conduit on your build, right? So it kind of defeats the purpose of having this aspect, and you may also run another just damage boosting aspect. But hypothetically, if you have enough like resource generation, say lucky hit chance to restore primary resource, and mana per second and so forth, and also perhaps resource cost reduction, you might be able to get away with using this aspect. But I also don't really have any available slots for it anywhere, say perhaps for one of the offensive slots, such as the Conceited or perhaps the Storm Swell, but I think I'd rather have this for more consistency. So just getting through some of the rest of my pieces, I do have recharging. This is extremely important and helps significantly to help you maintain your chain lightnings, and is a must-have combined with Axial Conduit. And then Tarasha's Loop is a godsend as well. It's very easy to get. You can just kill Varshan for it. So this is also pretty much a must-have because of the sheer huge amount of damage bonus that it gives you. And then Storm Swell is just a pretty decent damage boost. A 45% multiplier is pretty high, and you almost always have a barrier active, and a lot of enemies will be vulnerable because you'll have Ice Blades. And especially with the Ice Blade enchantment, you can actually just have more Ice Blades and more enemies, more vulnerable enemies around. And not only that, but if we now go quickly to Paragon, I'll just spotlight this Static Surge legendary node as well, which also, in addition to Ice Blades, makes enemies vulnerable. And just going through my Paragon really quick, this is like pretty cookie cutter based on the Maxwell Chain Lightning Paragon board, but with a few changes. So here I have Unleash on the starter board, and then the second board is of course Static Surge with Destruction here. This is kind of a flex pick, you don't necessarily have to run Destruction, but I figured the critical strike damage is nice for the Lightning Sphere aspect. Here I have some maximum mana. This is great to have for Chain Lightning. And then up here, the third board, I'm taking the Enchantment Master board, just to pass through it really quickly to get a third glyph. And here I'm using Elementalist, which is just a lot of damage because you're using all three elements. Fourth board here, I have Burning Instinct, but I'm not using the legendary node. I'm just using the glyph here where I have Tactician. This is actually a placeholder because I haven't leveled up my charged glyph yet. So once I level up charged enough, I'll probably just replace Tactician with charged because it increases my damage when I pick up Crackling Energy. And also increases the damage of Crackling Energy, which could be kind of nice as well. Moving up here, I have the Elemental Summoner Paragon board. This is actually different from the Maxwell Paragon board for Chain Lightning. It doesn't use Elemental Summoner, but I figured I'd take this as well for reduced cooldown. But the bonus damage might not actually be that helpful because again, most of the damage comes from the aspect for Lightning Spear, but I figured it's kind of worth the just few points that I'm putting in here anyway, because here I do want the maximum mana, which of course helps greatly for Chain Lightning anyhow, right? Next, moving on for the glyph here, I have Conjuration for longer Conjuration duration, which is great for both Lightning Spear and Ice Blades. Moving on here, I've got the Searing Heat board with the Flame Feeder glyph, which of course combos with the Firebolt enchantment. And lastly here, I have Exploit to deal additional vulnerable damage, and I also have the Frigid Fate legendary node here. And the rest is kind of just like survivability where I can get it, such as elite damage reduction here, and a couple of health nodes where I can get it. And that's pretty much it for my current iteration of the Chain Lightning Lightning Spear Hybrid Sorcerer Guide. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I think it is a very fun build to have, and I like the middle ground between Chain Lightning and Lightning Spear. Not just for the damage from Lightning Spear, but also the increased survivability, which is really nice. Anyhow, let me know what you think in the description box below. I'll be happy to hear your comments, and I always reply to every comment too. And with that, thank you so much for watching. Consider subscribing for more cutting edge videos, and happy hunting. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.